Hello, Gary, right there in Ontario, right there on Niagara Falls.
That's right.
Nice to have you on the show.
Nice to be here.
The last time we spoke to you, one of our colleagues, was back in 1981 in your home in Palos Verdes when you were just about to release the Wright play. So it's been a long time.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I think a lot of things have happened since then. Gary, let's start at the start. Let's go all the way back to New Jersey. Now, New Jersey, for some reason, seems to be a breeding ground for singers and musicians. What is it about New Jersey?
Well, that's where I grew up. I was very close to New York. As a child, I was an actor. I was on Broadway when I was like 12 years old. A show called Fanny.
What got you into acting there, Gary?
Well, my mom was kind of a singer before she got married, and so she kind of got my sister and I into the business. And so I did acting, and then when I was on Broadway, I actually sang and acted in a show that was quite successful. It was directed by Joshua Logan, and it was a hit. And so kind of put the initial bug into my system, I guess.
Fanny, is that correct?
Fanny, yes.
And I've got here that your mother in the show was played by Florence Henderson.
Florence Henderson, yes.
So can we call you a long-lost Brady Bunch kid then, can we?
Actually, I never got into that show. I was living in England, I think, at the time it was popular, but...
Well, I'll tell you what, Gary, my kids love it. They're 12 and 7 respectively, and they just watch it over and over.
Wow.
So it has a lot. Okay, so you've sort of got a taste of showbiz. Did you want to follow in your footsteps of your mother, or was there any focus yet?
Well, when I left Fanny, you have to understand, I was 12 years old, and I wanted to play sports and baseball, and when you're in a Broadway show, you don't have that opportunity because you have 6 shows a week in the evening, and then shows on Wednesday afternoon and Saturday afternoon, so it was kind of totally time-consuming. And I really got tired of it. I wanted to just play baseball and be with my friends. So I could have had a career as a child actor, but I decided that I didn't really want to do that and have it like more or less a normal life. And I decided to go to college, and I was going to be a doctor.
Oh, wow, Dr. Wright. Could do no wrong.
I always loved music because when I was in Fanny, I used to listen to early rock and roll on the radio, and I got all the records and stuff. And so I was totally into it. And when I was in high school and college, I used to play, on weekends and during the summers in bands because that's what I really liked doing.
When did you start playing piano or keyboards, or was that early?
Oh, gosh. I would say, I took a little bit of classical when I was like 8 or 9, and then I stopped, and then I kind of just retaught myself listening to like Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard and those kind of people. That would have been like in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. Finally, I decided I didn't want to be a doctor. I left med school, and I went to Europe, did one more year of postgraduate work in psychology in Berlin.
Why did you go to Berlin, of all places, Gary? Did you speak the language?
I had taken German in college.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted to leave the States and do some traveling in Europe. I thought I'd choose a country where I could at least speak some of the language. So I applied to the University of Berlin, and I got accepted. And so I went there for a year. It was an interesting experience because at that time Berlin was right in the middle of the Cold War. It was surrounded by the wall and all that.
How was your German? Did you get by?
My German was really good. Languages come very easily to me. I guess it's because I'm a singer, but I can really pick up sounds very quickly. So it was almost fluent, actually.
Okay,
I still speak it to this day.
But in the back of your mind, you had music because I've got here that you were part of Gary and Billy, a famous duo.
It wasn't a famous duo. It was just a duo that one of my friends, whose dad worked as an engineer at NBC in New York City, and we used to go in and cut some records together.
When did the big jump? I'm here in Germany, I'm studying, and did you fully drop out, or did you take up music part-time and study part-time?
Well, after about a year of having been in school, I decided that I wanted to really take a break from my studies because I didn't really want to be an academic. And I went back to the States, and I put a band together and then took it over to Europe, and we were touring around. And while I lived in America, in New Jersey, actually, a friend of mine was Jimmy Miller, who later became the producer who produced the Stones and Traffic. And he had gone to England because he was a friend of Chris Blackwell's, who had just started Island Records. And Jimmy went over and he produced Spencer Davis' group with, he did I'm a Man and Give Me Some Lovin'. And then so he produced Traffic's first album. I was in Norway at the time playing, and it was Traffic's first gig. So I met Chris Blackwell, who owned Island Records and was Traffic's manager, and he asked me to come back to Britain later on that year, and he had these 4 other musicians that he wanted to put me together with, and I came up with the name Spooky Tooth, and so that's really my professional...
Where did that come from, Gary? Where did this name...
It came from a friend of mine who was studying at Yale University, and he used to write this crazy atonal poetry. I told him I was looking for some names for bands, and he sent me over this list of all these crazy names, one of which was Spooky Tooth, and we all decided that we liked that and chose that as a band name. Was
Chris Blackwell familiar with your music? Were you writing songs full-time there as well, or how did that come about?
Well, I had written a song, actually, when I was in Europe called Sunshine Help Me, which is the first single that Spooky Tooth recorded. Then I started to write the first album we did called It's All About. Obviously, then he was our manager, and we were signed to Island Records, and so he knew my abilities, so to speak.
what happened to the New York Times? Your
That
band?
dissolved when I joined Spooky Tooth.
And the guys went back to the US and became doctors?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, they went back to the U.S.
So Chris had the band Art already, and he just, added you on, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so Art had recorded an album. They were a fully formed band. What did the guys think of this American interloper, or did you just, get on immediately?
Oh, yeah, we did. I mean, I think I was a novelty for them because they're coming from America and they had never really worked with a lot of Americans. Two of the guys were from Northern England, from Carlisle, and the other two were from the Midlands and around Birmingham, that area. So actually, we all got on quite well, and it was really a fun experience. And I did about 90% of the writing in the band and was one of the lead singers, myself and Mike Harrison.
So you were prepared to stay there in England? I mean, because by then you would have known music business isn't easy. I've got to stick at it, stick with Spooky Tooth and get the following. And so were you prepared to leave?
Well, at that time, the business wasn't like it is now. And at that time, you were nurtured as an artist. And there was a concept called artist development, which kind of slid by the wayside in the 90s and the 2000s, where labels would stay with artists 2, 3, 4, 5 albums until they actually became well known. And that was the case with Spooky Tooth. Ireland really was with us, and Chris, he let us have usage of a farm he had out in the English countryside where we could write our music, and it was very, very, very creatively friendly. And I was having a blast because at that time, in the late 60s in England, it was probably the best place in the world to be for music. So many great bands were coming out of the UK, and great place.
Those Beatles were around at the 60s as well, weren't they?
Yeah.
So the first album, It's All About, which is a very promising album. Love Really Changed Me. I love your keyboard riff in that. How does the writing process come to you, Gary? Does the lyrics pop in first, the melody, or it's all different?
I kind of like to mix it up. It's never really the same. A lot of times I'll just pick up an acoustic guitar and I'll write a song on it. Usually the music comes first and then the lyrics second. Sometimes I'll just be in my studio and I'll be playing around and get some great sound up with my keyboards and then compose a song that way. And then I'll take it and I'll put it in the context of some kind of unusual production, whether it's some kind of interesting rhythm or whatever, and come up with a full song.
So was this first Spooky Tooth album, was this your first experience in a real recording studio?
More or less, yeah. I had made a couple of records before
Gary
when I
and
lived
Billy.
in New Jersey, but nothing of any significance. I had been in a studio, but not in the creative environment that was in with a producer and all that. That was Spooky Tooth.
So how did it come? You had a germ of an idea at home and then you brought it to the rest of the Spooky Tooth guys?
Yeah, I'd play them something that I had an idea or a finished song and played them some material. And I would try to write, keeping in mind how the other singer would sing, rehearse it up, and then take it into the studio and record it.
Because Mike Harrison sort of got a more hoarser sound, if that's all.
Yeah, more like a Ray Charlesy kind of voice.
Which isn't bad for a white Englishman living in the...
No, not at all.
So the first album did okay, and Ireland, because I've spoken to a few Ireland artists over the years, and they said a great big family there in the offices, and Chris, you said a nurturing kind of guy. It did okay commercially too, didn't it, the first album? It was promising.
Yeah, I don't think it charted, or if it did, it charted very low. We were on the wrong kind of label in America. We were on a label called Bell Records, which really was a singles label, and they really didn't understand or get what Spooky Tooth was as a band. So we then switched to A&M, distributed our stuff in the States, and we stayed on Ireland and Europe.
Spooky 2 came next, which was more commercially successful. I think, in my opinion, the creative peak in a rock sense, and I still play it in the car, Gary, and when I come to track 8, I always play that 3 or 4 times. I think that's your first masterpiece, in my humble opinion, Hangman
Hang My Shell. I like that song.
That
too.
is just a great song. Hang My Shell on the Trees, one of my favourites. Do you have favourites of your own?
Oh, sure, I do. I particularly like that one. We did a reunion tour, as a matter of fact, about a few years back, and that was one of the songs we did in the show.
With the first 2 albums under your belt, did you tour the States at all up to this time?
Yes, we did. We toured quite a lot, as a matter of fact.
Spooky 2 did quite well commercially, I assume critically as well. And I think back only in the 1960s would something like this happen. I assume a record company today would say, look, guys, Spooky 2, your next album's going to be big, big, big. Let's do Spooky 3. Let's do something similar but better. But you decide, or the band decides, to go and work with Pierre Henry, a French, what would I call him, French avant-garde music?
Electronic music composer. Yeah. Here's the thing about that a lot of people don't know about, and the truth is, it wasn't a Spooky Tooth album. It was a Pierre Henry album, and we were asked to just play on it just as a special little side project, and we thought, okay, we'll earn some money and we'll just do that, but it's not our album. When it was finished, Chris said, oh, it's great, we're going to release it as the next Spooky Tooth album. We all said, no, you can't do that. It has nothing to do with Spooky Tooth. Totally different, not even the same kind of direction of music or anything. And they put it out and it flopped, and the band got kind of ticked off and we split up.
There you go. Chris Blackwell made a mistake.
Yeah, big time.
Oh. Well, look, it's on CD. I've actually played it on one of my old shows the whole way through. It's unusual, a compelling album, and I particularly like Offering, and I've never heard a song that has as its hook heavy breathing.
Yeah, well, see, what he did is he took our master tapes, the 2-track masters, and then he just took those and added all his electronic music to it. He was a purist, an electronic music purist. I mean, he was a talented person. It's just that wasn't the kind of album we wanted to put out. From going from a kind of a rock, kind of progressive rock album to all of a sudden an electronic music album. It wasn't a cohesive move in our career, the right way to go. Because Spooky 2 actually was a good album. It had good songs and all that. The next album that I had written for Spooky 2 was my first solo album that I did on A&M, Extraction. So that was kind of like more what the Spooky Tooth album would have been.
What? Who found who? Did Pierre Henry find Spooky Tooth, or how did that all come about?
He found us. Actually, Philips France contacted Island and said, we have this composer and he wants to work with Spooky Tooth. He really likes their music, and that's how it all came about. Took the actual parts of the Catholic Mass and put lyrics to them and sang. That's the whole concept.
Did Spooky Tooth record it all first, and then, like you said, Henry came and did his...
We sent him the tapes, and then he overdubbed all his stuff. We weren't even in the studio when he did all that.
And what was your first impressions when you first heard it?
Well, we were shocked. We didn't think that was an album for us.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts of it today?
I still feel the same way. I just think it was a big mistake. There was momentum going in our career. We were big in Germany and all that, and the next album would have probably launched us into a very well-known group, and that kind of like put the brakes on it.
Maybe Chris Blacker was too nurturing.
Yeah, maybe.
Gary, Extraction and Footprint came next, and these are really, really great albums. I call them criminally neglected, if you don't mind there. And
yeah, no, I agree.
Top notch. Footprint is another one of my all-time favourites there. There's a track called Love to Survive. Why didn't radio pick that up? What was old Herb Alpert like? Did he push the albums, or why weren't they hits?
It's just one of those things. They got a fair amount of radio play, but for one reason or another, they just didn't break through. It's just one of those, why didn't something happen? It's just that, I guess it's one of those facts of life that sometimes you think you have all the ingredients there, but for one reason or another, you just don't make the success mark. And so they went by the wayside, and I was very disappointed.
I can imagine.
Extraction, I really loved that album. When that didn't hit, I couldn't believe it. And then Footprint, the same thing. When I had George Harrison working on that album, and at that time, George, was a Beatle and huge. And I thought, well, there's no way that this could fail. But sure enough, it didn't happen.
Right time at the right place, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
One of the artists I spoke to, he had one big hit that supported his career, and he said, look, Nick, it's lightning in a bottle. It just happens. Everything is serendipitous, and you're right there where the lightning strikes you. If you get it twice, then you're very, very lucky. But there was hope there for the Gary Wright name. But Gary, I just want to talk about Gary Wright and Wonder Wheel album. Now, you recorded an album, and on the internet it even has a title called Ring of Changes. Has it ever been released?
I'm just in the process now of negotiating with Universal Music, who own A&M, who was the company that it was actually recorded for, in re-releasing that. So hopefully by the end of the year or beginning of next year it'll come out.
Well, we'd love to hear it, because I assume I Know, which is on the That Was Only Yesterday compilation, which is a great compilation of your material and Spooky Tooth material. That was from the album and the sessions?
I Know was the single from the album, yeah, that's correct.
And so that'll be on the re-release?
Yes.
So did you do the Wonder Wheel album after Footprint?
Yes, I did.
Okay, yeah.
Actually, what happened was that was the third album I did, and A&M actually didn't pick it up. They decided not to release it, so they just put it in their vault. And then I went back to Spooky Tooth, and we did 3 more albums.
There's a track on the B-side of I Know called Tonight It's Right. Now, obviously, you love to Survive, because when I put Tonight It's Right on the turntable, sounds a bit like Love to Survive there.
Yeah, that's right.
And I noticed that...
Yeah, that's amazing.
And I noticed that the songwriting credit is yourself and your sister.
For
Tonight It's Right.
Oh, okay, I forgot about that. You just brought that to my attention.
Oh, okay. Did she follow music, or this is just a lot of favourite to her brother?
She had a deal, actually, with Elton John's label. She did an album. It didn't really do anything, but she did record some stuff.
For Rocket Records?
Yes.
The Wonder Wheel, that would have been a bit of a blow to you, not having the album released.
Oh, yeah, sure. It was.
And that was the end of your contract at A&M, is that right?
That was the end, yeah. We went back to Ireland, and we did 3 more Spooky Tooth albums. That's then Mick Jones joined the band. He actually was in Wonder Wheel, too. What
made you go back, or did the guys at Spooky Tooth say, come back, Gary, you want to do it again, or what was the story behind that?
Well, I guess I thought that maybe I should go back and give it another try, because the solo thing wasn't happening for me at the time. And I reformed the band with Mick and myself and Bryson Graham, and Mike Harrison, and the bass player I think was, now I can't remember on You Broke My Heart, So I Busted Your Jaw. I think it was Keith Ellison, I think he may have been the bass player, or Archie Leggett, I can't remember. But anyway, it was actually a good album, I thought. There were some really good things on it. Oh, Chris Stewart, that's right. He was the bass player.
Well, you must have liked the album because you redid Wildfire on, was it The Human Love?
The Human Love album.
Well, what a great title, and I don't think you can get away with You Broke My Heart, So I Busted Your Jaw these days, can you?
I don't know. It was an old Ike and Tina Turner record. That was the title. And I just said it as a joke once during the session. I said, yeah, let's call it You Broke My Heart, So I Busted Your Jaw. And everybody went, yeah, that's great. And I went, no, you can't name it that. Actually, everybody twisted my arm and said, we've got to call it that. It's a great title. A lot of people really liked it.
It's a very memorable title, and I didn't know it was an Ike and Tina Turner song, and I suppose with Ike Turner's reputation, what else?
Yeah, right.
Oh, Gary, so you did the 3 albums, and what happened? You called it a day, obviously.
Well, we got into one of those situations again. The last album was called The Mirror. We finished recording it. Eddie Kramer actually co-produced it with us.
Oh, okay.
He had done Jimi Hendrix. He was Jimmy's engineer. And so we sent the tapes into Island, and they rejected them. And so I said, that's it. No more Island for me. And I left. I was being managed by Dee Anthony, who was managing Peter Frampton and Joe Cocker. And so he said, let's try and get a deal for you at Warner Brothers. And so Warner Brothers signed me, and I started writing songs for my next album. And as I was writing the songs, I was just writing them with all my keyboards that I had in Spooky Tooth. And I thought, wow, this sounds really cool just with no guitars. Maybe I'll do the whole album that way. And I did it just with very basic kind of stuff. I wanted to make it really sparse production-wise. I had a couple of people playing with me. David Foster played the keyboards, and Bobby Lyle did some of the other keyboards. Jim Keltner played drums on one of the tracks, and Andy Newmark played drums on the rest of the stuff. And I turned it into Warner Brothers, and they released it. And radio jumped all over Dreamweaver. And Dreamweaver was the very last song that went on the album. I had 2 songs to choose from, and I was in the studio with David Foster and Jim Keltner, and I said, David, I have these 2 songs. Which do you think we should put on? He said, Dreamweaver. I said, okay, let's do that. I don't mind.
What was the other choice?
Empty Inside, which wound up on the next album I did, The Light of Smile.
Uh-huh.
So I never thought Dreamweaver was going to be a single. The lyrics kind of lend themselves to imaginative kind of sounds, so I put all these electronic sounds on. And when we released the album, Love is Alive was the first single, and it stiffed. But Dreamweaver was getting all this play on radio, and Warner said, okay, we're going to release Dreamweaver, and it went right up to #1 in the charts. And then they re-released Love is Alive, and it went to #2. And then I was doing all this big touring with Peter Frampton and Yes and Fleetwood Mac that summer of '76. We played these huge baseball stadiums, and it was great. You know, I must have played to several million people that summer.
How did you cope with all the... Because I was a young lad at the time, and I remember Dreamweaver on the radio here in Melbourne, and it was the biggest thing, so you would have been white hot. You would have had fame after all that paying your dues, so to speak. You would have had it thrust upon you in a big way. So how did you cope?
Well, you know, you have to try and take it in your stride. It's kind of like being torn apart in every direction. Everybody wants a piece of you, or they want to do interviews with you, or they want this, or they want that. So it was stressful, but in a good way. It was stressful, but really enjoyable to go out and play for all these people and have all that recognition and approval, and it was a great experience.
Well, your manager followed his blueprint, because just after you, like you mentioned, Peter Frampton, and Peter Frampton had the same trajectory. He was in a reasonably successful band of the 60s. He does a few good albums that are totally ignored in the early 70s, and it just goes through the roof with Comes Alive.
That's right.
Same with you, through the roof with Dreamweaver.
See, it's timing. And the whole thing with keyboards, too, with an all-keyboard album, it was actually used as a marketing tool, because the radio used to say, and this album doesn't have any guitars on it. You know, It was actually one track with guitar. That was Power of Love.
Okay.
Ronnie Montrose played. But I mean, my going out on the road, I had an all-keyboard band. I was probably the first artist to ever do that, and that kind of like worked to my advantage.
And where's the jumpsuit now, Gary?
Oh, it's in one of my closets.
Oh, look, you could probably put it up on eBay if you're ever hard up. Dreamweaver, is that a term that was around in the language before, or what's the genesis?
In the 70s, in the early 70s, I became friendly with George Harrison. I was invited to come down and play on his album, All Things Must Pass. Klaus Vormann was a friend of mine. He had played on Extraction, and he said, George is looking for another keyboard player, and I went down and played on the first track, Isn't It a Pity, and he invited me to come back and play on the rest of the albums, and quickly became friends. We had a mutual kind of interest for Eastern philosophy, and he kind of became my mentor. And he invited me to go to India with him as the guest of Ravi Shankar as a means of kind of introducing me to the philosophy of India. He gave me several books, one of which was written by an Indian master named Paramahansa Yogananda. And I was reading one of the books one night, and I came across this poem, and one of the lines in the poem was, "When at night my mind weaves dreams, on that magic cloth do I emboss the words God, God, God." And I looked at weaves dreams, and I wrote down the words Dreamweaver, and I put it in my writing journal. 9 or 10 months later on, when I was back in England, I was out in the countryside writing, and I was looking through my writing journal, and I saw that title, and I just decided to write a song. I wrote it on an acoustic guitar, and so that was the story behind it.
Gary, I put in the search engine Dreamweaver, did the Google thing, expecting to find Gary Wright Dreamweaver, but the first thing that comes up is Dreamweaver, a web-based program.
Macromedia.
So did Dreamweaver, I think it's an Adobe program, so did they take
Yeah, it's a software application that people use. It's like Adobe. You can't copyright anything in every field of business. I would have had to have my own software company named Dreamweaver to prevent these people from using that title, but because Dreamweaver is only a musical composition, you can't go after people like that if they use it for something else. It's been, it's the names of sailboats. It's been used so much.
I suppose it's a backhanded compliment in a way. We like it. We're going to take it?
Yeah. I mean, they actually did make a mistake, and they did use my song in advertising without permission, so I did...
Or you put the clamps on them.
Yeah, a bit. There wasn't any big major lawsuit, but I mean, they had to stop doing it.
There's another one of their programs called Venus in Furs, which is the Velvet Underground song, but then again, the Velvet Underground took it off a book.
Oh, yeah.
So whoever runs the Adobe Corporation obviously is a music fan.
Yeah, they like to steal song titles.
Yours included. Now, Gary, Dreamweaver is still a ubiquitous song. Of course, it was used in Wayne's World, and it's used in Toy Story 3. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Oh, wow. There you go. You'll see more money rolling in, Gary.
Yeah. I've been blessed. I mean, I really am, because that song, you never know when you write something, even if it's a hit. You never know. I mean, there's a difference between a hit and a classic, and it actually has become a classic. It's still played all over radio here in the States, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, too. It's regularly used and licensed for, like, commercials and or television programs, so I've been really fortunate. Love is alive as well.
After your Dreamweaver album, you're fairly prolific. You keep recording albums till 1981, of course, The Right Place, and Really Want to Hold You was a big hit here in Australia, and that's why
Really Want to Know You? Really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, a very big hit, yeah. That's why we sent one of our DJs over to your Palos Verdes home back then, out the back in the studio, and I think...
Okay, sure.
Old Peter Grace interviewed you, and I think it was Dean Parks, your engineer, I think?
Dean Parks was my co-producer.
So you kept releasing albums, and then you took a bit of a hiatus, and so you've been releasing albums sparsely over the last, let's say, nearly 30 years. So what else have you been up to, or have you just been concentrating on music? What's been going on, Gary?
I took the first hiatus to really raise my kids. I didn't want to, neglect them, so I spent a lot of time doing that. I did a couple of film scores, did some writing with other people.
What's it like writing film scores? Because I noticed you did one around the time of the Wonder Wheel project, one called Benjamin, which would have been...
Oh, yeah, that was a friend of mine, Willie Bogner, was a fan of Spooky Tooth, and he was a German filmmaker, and he actually shot all the early James Bond ski scenes because he was a champion skier in the Olympics for Germany. His family owned this company called Bogner, which is a very high-end kind of ski apparel and sports clothing business in Europe. He was a big fan of Spooky Tooth, and he asked me to score his first film, Benjamin, and then I subsequently did more music for him over the years, another film called Fire and Ice and Fire, Ice and Dynamite. And I also worked on Staying Alive. Sylvester Stallone directed it.
The Saturday Night Fever.
The Saturday Night Fever. I did a film called Endangered Species. That was kind of like a thriller, and bits and pieces from other movies. And then I did my next album in '87 called Who I Am, which had some really good stuff on it. Never really happened commercially. And then the next album I did was in '95 called First Signs of Life, which was kind of an African-Brazilian album.
Still got the distinctive Gary Wright footprint to it.
Yeah. And then I did an album called Human Love. That was just around 2000. And then I released an album that I had done actually back in the 80s, an ambient music album called Waiting to Catch the Light. That was a couple of years back, and then Connected.
All right, Gary Wright, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us.
Right, thank you, Nick.